tape consists of regular 8 and Super 8 movies taken over a period of almost 20 years and transferred to videotape. There's some loss of quality both because of the age of the films and in the transfer process. The last part consists of video pictures of fires taken in the last 2 years. There is also some loss of quality because of the transfer to secondary tape. This was a fire on the edge of Santa Rosa, actually in Department of Forestry district, but Santa Rosa gave mutual aid and did most of the firefighting. The fire occurred inside the building, the house, but there was an extensive amount of involvement of the attic and the roof. The men working inside the house were not actually aware of the amount of fire involving the roof and the attic. There's no hydrants available in this area, so that the water supply came solely from tankers. Forestry supplied one tanker, and later Santa Rosa was able to add an additional tanker. The man on the ladder is an off-duty Santa Rosa fireman working on the roof with a booster line from a Santa Rosa engine. It's very obvious that the amount of water that he has available isn't doing anything at all to even begin to control the roof fire. A short time later, after the tanker arrived, an 1.5-inch line was used on the roof, but that also, for practical purposes, was ineffectual in controlling the fire. There was an 1.5-inch line working inside the house during this time. There's our Santa Rosa man again taking the 1.5-inch line to the roof, but even with the additional amount of water, it does literally nothing to control the fire when applied from the outside in this way. They tried to do a little better by using a line at the back of the house. About this time, they became aware of the degree of outside involvement. The men inside became aware, and they pulled the ceilings and were able to attack the fire from the inside. And it's interesting to see how quickly it controls it when attacked in this manner. At this point, it's still burning very freely. But in just a moment, a line sweeps from the inside and the fire is literally knocked down immediately. Certainly demonstrates the effectiveness of working from the interior on this type of a fire. Santa Rosa engine, a Van Pelt, I'm not sure what year, taking water from the tanker in use at that time, which was a 1953 GMC with a 120-gallon pump and 1,200 gallon capacity. Two white engines, tanker and engine, are Sonoma County rigs. This fire came in as an unknown fire by the county hospital. It was a school for retarded children, constructed of Quonset hut type buildings, and was obviously fully involved. The men used a 2.5-inch line from the front with a fog pattern. They had another 2.5-inch line playing down on the fire from a hillside next to the building. But with this amount of fire, why, they obviously couldn't control it, and the building was a total loss. That big line isn't making a dent. I heard this fire in my monitor in my car on the way home, so I had an early arrival about the same time as the engine. Santa Rosa old engine 1, 1951 Van Pelt, pulling an 1.5-inch live line. Took one line around inside, and the second line used to attack the fire from outside. Might not be too good if somebody were in there, but there wasn't. '51 Van Pelt is on a Kenworth chassis. Has a 400 gallon tank. This was an apartment. Actually, the fire was upstairs and outside on a back porch, almost entirely outside, spreading to an exposure. Called an immediate second alarm, which at that time in Santa Rosa meant 4 engines and a truck, total of 13 men. With a single 2.5-inch line and an 1.5-inch line, they controlled the fire very rapidly since it was outside. In fact, so rapidly that I hardly had time to get any good pictures. Of course, at that time, we didn't use 4-inch feeder lines, so that the engine was hooked directly to the hydrant. That's engine 1. The others would be Van Pelts. This fire was very close to my home, so again, I had an early arrival. Engine laying in a 2.5-inch feeder line from hydrant to the fire, which was a roof attic fire. Elderly gentleman was home but uninjured. His wife was at church. It was on a Sunday morning. Took one line around behind, another line in the front door. Appears to be some confusion, and the problem actually here was that they had inadvertently charged the hose bed and had to rearrange things. Battalion Chief. Took another hose bundle to work on the roof from the outside. The average person watching this sequence of film would think that it took forever to get the fire under control, but I think you'd be surprised if you timed it from laying the hose at the hydrant till the roof is darkened down. It's not much more than a minute and a half or so. This was an old two-story house in the center of town, used by transients. It was fully involved, and that's about as fully involved as you can get when the units arrived. There wasn't any question of trying to save the house, but simply to cool it down and protect exposures. There was a water problem, even though it was in town, because it was on a dead-end street, and the mains were such that the hydrant available right by the fire delivered only some 800 gallons, and they had to go to other hydrants further away. It's rather surprising that the upper stories didn't collapse and fall over, considering the amount of fire. Another small, weak hose stream. Fire has burned right through the wall of the house completely, so that the upright studs are showing there. Fire inspectors on the scene the next day to see if they can find anything out, and also be sure and block off the building, which I'm sure was very dangerous to be near at that point. This was a fire in a store in a local shopping center. In the back room, you couldn't get through the front because of the amount of smoke and heat, so an engine came behind here and dropped an 1.5 inch and a 2.5 inch line, and then drove to the hydrant to hook up. The men opened the back door probably a little too soon before the lines were adequately charged, and they encountered a lot of fire. That's the chief. That little glitch was where I sort of dropped the camera for a minute. This fire was almost certainly arson. It was actually taken to court and tried, but unfortunately no conviction was obtained. It's a large grocery store, supermarket, on a Sunday morning. Some indication that flammable liquid had been spread around. Again, a second alarm would bring 4 engines, each with a 3-man crew, plus the truck with 1 man. They set up the ladder in front of the building. That's a 1949 American of France with an 85-foot aerial. They set up a monitor alongside the building, but there obviously wasn't enough pressure when it first was put into operation. Attempted to move it a little closer. Got a ladder pipe going. The truck was close enough to the fire that there was some paint blistering, and I believe it cracked the windshield. Firefighter climbing the ladder to direct the pipe. Got a good stream going with the monitor at this point. Building was a total loss, although the shell remained and it has been rebuilt and is now being used as an office complex. One of several chiefs on hand. Men using a large line up close in front. Fellow in the white, milkman actually, is a volunteer with the Bellevue Department, a local small department, and he's giving a hand. As I recall, there were rekindles for days afterward. This was a feed mill south of Santa Rosa, with the center part of the mill quite heavily involved in fire. Multiple departments from the area responded. Probably some 8 or 9 in all, including Bellevue, Pengrove, Rincon Valley, Roseland, Twin Hills, Hessel, and the Division of Forestry. These tankers are usually essentially homemade, so they don't follow a particular line. That looks like a Roseland tanker. This is a Bellevue unit. This is interesting. This is a portable water tank with the tankers discharging their load directly into the canvas portable tank and the pumpers drafting directly from it. You don't see that used very often. It was a very difficult fire in terms of getting to the seat of the fire itself, which was burning inside, and the grain and materials within the mill and back inside the walls. Large column of smoke. had to work on the walls and strip away outside covering in order to try and get to the seat of the fire. Most of these men would be volunteers. There'd be a few paid men in each department, but largely volunteers. Overhaul took a day or two, slowly tearing apart the ruins, put out the last of the fire. This was a laboratory serving the medical community. Did a variety of medical tests, had a lot of expensive equipment in the laboratory. The fire occurred on a Sunday. One of the workers was at the lab and an explosion of some type occurred. He was slightly burned, not seriously. But fire erupted immediately. The large body of fire there is coming from the attic area, which was full of storage material, boxes, and so on, and was apparently quite difficult to get to. Some question was raised whether there might be a natural gas line involved or broken. A number of hand lines, 1.5 inch lines were used, 5 or 6. This is along the south side of the building. Fire has involved the entire end of the building and spread into the attic and broken through the roof by this time. The fireman with the black helmet on the far left is probably a sleeper, a part-time sort of student fireman employed on weekends and evenings at that time in the department. It looks as if they're having problems getting really effective streams onto the fire. I talked later to the battalion chief and asked him whether he had thought about or planned using heavier lines, particularly going right into the attic area from the outside, but he felt that that wouldn't do any more than simply push the fire back right into the structure itself. That's the back door, which would be on the west end of the building, which is open now, but it was impossible to actually enter the burning area. The rooms were small, fully involved. This again is the west end of the building with the north end to our left. Fire still burning very vigorously up in the attic area. The fellow in the plaid shirt to the far left is a very nervous pathologist watching his business go up in smoke. A little slippery there on the roof. Fire spread down the west end, the west wall of the building from the attic extending down. Firemen went after it with a hand line and quickly extinguished it. It's a major loss in this fire. They had a machine for doing panel laboratory tests in there, and the loss was somewhere between $250,000 and $750,000 million of damage, mostly because of the very expensive testing machines. And some bottles of gases that had ignited. Captain is cooling one down there. That's the sleeper again with the black helmet. Only 2 engines on this fire. This was an explosion that occurred about late in the morning in a large apartment complex. A gentleman attempted suicide by filling his apartment with gas, which then ignited. Fire erupted very shortly thereafter. Ambulance men arriving there, engines have just arrived and have set up hose lines. Ambulance crew to the right are picking up an injured person who turned out to be the man who attempted suicide. Nobody knew at this time whether there were any or how many other occupants under that rubble. It turned out that the gentleman who set the explosion off died, but he was the only one in the complex at the time of the explosion, fortunately, so there wasn't anybody else injured. But it was a very uncomfortable feeling for the men to see that much damage and that much fire without knowing whether anybody else was trapped. A second alarm was called on this fire, which brought a total of 4 engines and a ladder truck. I believe this was the first fire where a 4-inch feeder hose was used in Santa Rosa. Long, tedious job to uncover the ruins. Title, this doesn't have a title. This is a barn fire, typical barn fire, early morning, southwest of Santa Rosa, again with several departments involved: Bellevue, Roseland, Hessel, Two Rock. Barn fire of this type, of course, is extremely difficult to handle.